Go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the NRN Plus Economy Town Hall. Now, you might be used to seeing me, Luke Negron, Republican candidate for PA18, on the interviewee side. However, today I have the blessing and the privilege to be the interviewer, which is something I very much enjoy. And also, I think I'm going to be learning and taking in information alongside you as we host this Economy Town Hall. So I'm very happy to introduce someone who is a national tax reform expert, CEO of Engineered Tax Services. He is an expert in tax reform, and his strong presence in helping to define our current tax laws has been noteworthy. Now, he has been the founder and CEO of National of Engineered Tax Services, and under his leadership, which has shaped this business, he has had one of the largest, fastest growing, and most innovative engineering, energy, and specialty tax credit service firms in the country, in the United States. This is Julio Gonzalez, everybody. We are going to welcome Julio in just a moment here, and we are going to be asking him some of your questions, which you have submitted to NRN Plus for this town hall. So, Julio, go ahead and join us, and we are excited to get off the ground and get to talking with you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to be on this show with you. We're excited. I have my co-pilot here, Karen Turk, who's a political TV and radio host across the country. And so we're here to take those questions.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. And Karen, hey, welcome. I guess you're a last minute addition, which I love. I'm all about living on the fly, and I am more than happy to have two experts in the house. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Glad to be here. And, I love doing anything I can with Julio, national tax reform expert, brilliant human being, strong supporter of President Donald Trump, and a freedom fighter for America.
I love it. I love it. All right, guys, let's dive right into the questions. Because one of my mottos is that the best way to learn about anybody is to have this interaction. And one of the beautiful things that we have today are a lot of fan-submitted questions about the economy and about some current events that we see really plaguing and raising up a lot of questions today in American life. So let's go to something from Lydia L., who asks, hello, Mr. Gonzalez. Do you feel the coronavirus stimulus packages put forth have been as effective as they could have been? If not, what would you have done differently? This is something I'm very interested too as an aspiring policymaker. So why don't you talk to us about these coronavirus stimulus and relief packages?
Yeah, I think they were a good effort. I think, you have to have the House and the Senate agree to any bill and then have the president sign off. So there's going to be compromise if any bill is going to get done. And so we start with that because the good was the PPP loan programs. Certainly the instruction there was a little bit, unknown at the beginning, but certainly that got cleared up. But certainly we had some money that that was put out for people to stay at home. I don't think that was the best thing because it kept 10 million people home. And I think that was tough. But look, we were hoping that the CARES Act got us through 8 weeks and that at the end of the 8 weeks, the pandemic would be over. It's still not over. We're working on the HEROES Act. President's doing some executive orders to keep things going. But, when you have the House and the Senate divided between a Republican and Democrats, you're going to have some compromises. And clearly, we're not going to like everything that comes from that. Right, Karen?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Excellent. Now, is there anything that, I guess the back end of this question is there anything you would have done differently? And if so, for both of you, as Karen as a political advisor, Julio as an economist, what might that have been? What might have tweaked this to be more effective? And how, looking forward, could we maybe implement changes? Because we still see some acts in the works right now, right? I think we're far from out of the woods. So what might we be able to do to better ourselves in the long run?
Yeah, I think I would have done the employer tax credits, which actually the president did the executive orders over the weekend. He knows that's important, right? If we have an employee tax credit holiday through the end of the year, that's a big savings for us that we can use to invest in people. Obviously, for the individuals getting paid, that's a big savings as well. And I think that may have made this difference in who stays home and who doesn't, right? That's a big pay raise. I think that would have been a great thing we should have done up front. I think the president recognized it. I think he got House and Senate to try to do something last week that didn't happen. So he put the executive order in. I think he's seeing that the things that could have been done better, now he's trying to work on.
And I think it's important to remember that this whole thing has been a moving target since the beginning. This is not something that's definitive that you can plan for. It's something that's evolving and changing as this crisis has evolved and changed. So, the president is doing things in the best interest of the moment, but at the same time, there hasn't been the same type of planning that we've had in other crises in the past.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So, and I guess what you're saying is something that might have made sense back in March, perhaps now doesn't make sense anymore. But back then, with the information we had, it made sense to try. It was a viable effort, and or rather an option, and it just no longer is, because this is an evolving scenario that we were all hit with in January of 2020. Is that correct?
Precisely. And if you even look at just what changed between January and March, I mean, in January, we had Dr. Fauci going on the Today Show and NBC and all these stations saying, oh, we don't have a problem. This isn't going to be a problem for America. And, by March 15th, we're in a situation where they were making predictions that 2.2 million Americans would die. So he's making predictions based on Bill Gates' research, and I could get into all that, and I'll avoid that for the purposes of this conversation. But, the reality is that we're dealing with data that is skewed. We don't necessarily know what we're dealing with, and the president is making decisions in the moment that off of the best information that we have in that moment, and that's been the case since January.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Let's dive into a two-part question here that's kind of a follow-up to this, and it says, number one, this is from Jay Brown, and he asks, what is the best thing that these stimulus measures have achieved for small business owners? So specifically for small business. And number two, from Larry H. in this two-part question, what are the best steps business can take to both survive COVID-19 and help their communities get through the strain? So small business, how have they been helped? And then what can business owners do to help their communities and themselves recover?
I think no doubt the PPP loan for small businesses was very important, right? Because the bulk of it was forgiven through payroll and rent and utility payments. So that was a big deal. And I think that was a great program that helped small businesses survive to the summer. I mean, we were thinking that we would be through the virus and on the other side of this through the summer, but certainly those loans made available that were forgiven, if they were utilized for employment, I think was the big boost for small businesses on question one.
Okay.
I would love to take question two, because the question two is right up my alley. And, I've been saying since the beginning of this, we have to, and I'm going to use the word evolve again, and I may overuse that word on this episode, but I think it's an important one, is business owners have to adapt with the change. They have to embrace technology, and they have to find new ways of doing business. And there are a lot of businesses that have done even better in this crisis than they anticipated or expected, because they've embraced technology. Things like we're doing today, webinars, Zoom, whatever platforms you want to use. But the businesses that are succeeding and thriving are the ones that are embracing technology. And as much as many businesses were somewhat resistant to that before this crisis, it's become a necessary evil. So the businesses that are embracing technology, I think, are doing much better. And I think that's something that we can learn positively through this crisis.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. And I guess, so this is a question from me, not from a listener, but how would you say this has affected and will continue to affect politics? Because I think we've seen a shift in campaigning. We've seen a shift in getting your political message out there. Just like businesses have to evolve to survive, they have to be adaptable. So do politicians and people who are now in the midst of arguably the biggest election cycle in modern history. So how might this affect us, and how might this carry forward into the future years and teach us lessons?
Well, I think that's a double-edged sword. I think that really is a question that needs to be pondered, because, coming from the right side of things, and, I do sit on the right side of the aisle. It's no surprise to anybody watching this. But on the right side of the aisle, one of the problems that we have is that we do feel that this crisis has been overplayed for political gain by the Democratic Party, and that it's been used as political warfare. And that's something that's very important to take into consideration when we're pondering what's next, because it'll be very interesting to see what takes place come November and come election. when, Donald Trump hopefully wins the election again and is our president for another 4 years, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this crisis. So I think that what this has taught us and what we can learn from it is that, politics do come into play with natural disasters, with crises like COVID, with things that affect the American people as a whole. And it's up to us as Americans to take control back. We are a free country to speak our mind and to tell the people that represent us, your Congress people, your senators, they represent you. We have to be strong and send a message to those officials and how we want to be represented in Washington, D.C. And that's something that I think the American people are going to learn through this crisis is, hey, you know what? We have to take control to get our message heard, and not in a way that resorts to violence and some of the things that we've seen through the left, through intelligent conversation and through our local groups like our Republican executive committees and things that we have to get our message heard. And it's going to be very important for us to do that as time goes on.
Right on. Excellent. Yeah. And I think we do see some of the economy being sacrificed for political gain. And I think that is one of the most heinous things we can see, because the economy directly affects human life, human health, and our well-being as a country. So I think that's a huge step to take.
100%. And I think, weakening the spirit of the American people, unfortunately, feeds the beast of people that don't have our best interests at heart. And again, coming from the right side of the aisle, I think it's important to remember that the Democratic Party, the Obama administration, historically have had ties with globalist billionaires. And unfortunately, those people may not be in touch with you and I, who are trying to feed our kids and run our local business and survive as entrepreneurs. They aren't really on the same level as us, but yet they're the ones that are pulling the strings. So you got to remember what the agenda is and what's happening behind the scenes.
Yes, absolutely. Remembering the agenda and the incentive for the people who are holding power, the elitists in positions of power. I think that's very important. Let's move on to a question from Vic A, who asks for Julio. What would you suggest to stop unnecessary closures and social distancing that is continuing to suppress the economy? So I guess first, perhaps the first part of this question, which seems to be assumed, is, do you believe that certain elements are unnecessary, certain elements of the lockdowns and of this social distancing that we see happening? Do you believe that there's an element of that is overblown? And if so, how would you suggest that we stop the unnecessary extended lockdowns?
Yeah, we're very fortunate, Karen and I, to be here in South Florida, where we've been open up. I mean, we've barely shut down for a couple of weeks. And since, middle of April, we've been open up. Businesses have been open, restaurants have been open, parks are open, beaches are open, gyms are open. So businesses are doing well here. People are open for business, right, Karen? And, we're so fortunate to have a good government here in the state of Florida that says, let's get back to work. Let's do it safely.
Yeah.
Let's put the mask on. Let's do some things to be safe, but let's get back to work so that we're not killing small business and individuals long term.
And I see a lot of small businesses here that are still struggling, because even though we are opened up here in Florida and we're not in a total lockdown, we definitely have advantages over New York and other places. But at the same time, you see a lot of local businesses that are still really struggling through this thing. And it's unfortunate, because I think there is a safe way to do things. And certainly, even though I don't agree with a lot of what's going on, I don't want to see an elderly person get sick. I don't want to be responsible for getting somebody else sick. I don't want to get sick myself. Nobody does. But, do we sacrifice our economy, our well-being, our families, and our future over a virus? We've never done that before. This is new. And I think a big reason and a big factor in this is the election of Donald Trump and, the 2020 election.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we have a question here from Sarah B that hits on a topic that we touched on earlier. And it's, what kind of stimulus legislation should we expect to see out of Congress in the coming months? So we mentioned that we might see an ongoing legislative process where, since we're not out of the woods yet, and since this is still election year and this might continue to be leveraged for political purposes, we might see an ongoing process here. What type of legislation do you think we should expect to see coming down the pipelines as at least a proposal?
Yeah, I think we have to reward businesses for being open and hiring people and reward people that are going back to work. I think we have to do some type of incentives to help the businesses get back to work, right, Karen?
Yeah, I think that's very smart. I think it's very capitalistic of you. And that's what our country has been founded on, is capitalism. And I think it's important to remember that, when we incentivize people to go back to work, they're willing to do it. People want to be motivated. When we think that they want a handout, that's not true. People didn't come to this country and found this country. Our country is a country founded on immigrants that came to this country to run small businesses, to survive and to thrive. So I don't think anybody necessarily wants a handout. It's definitely not the norm. And I think most business owners want a hand up, not a handout.
I love that. And, here where I am right now in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, estimates have ranged up as high as 60% of businesses who closed for COVID-19 will never, or of restaurants rather, who closed for COVID-19 will never reopen. They will go out of business. So this idea that you proposed, Julio, of incentivizing and even rewarding businesses who reopen, giving them something to look forward to, something to hold on to, I think that's brilliant. It's something that, frankly, though, we haven't heard out of Washington yet. This is the first time I've heard it proposed. Have you heard any elected officials right now proposing that idea, other than perhaps Trump?
No, just Trump. But
Yeah.
I think, he's a businessman, so he understands getting back to work. And I think, listen, we need to incentivize the individuals to go out and use the restaurants and use the hotels and get back on the airlines and go travel. And to do that, maybe they get a small tax credit or the ability to expense that.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the one thing that we were really winning at, all of us were winning at, all of America was winning at, not just Donald Trump, was the economy. It was one of his big wins in his presidency. And how convenient this crisis was, and what was the one thing that the other side could trash to motivate Americans to be in a place where they weren't in such a good position anymore, where they weren't feeling good about the economy. They used this crisis as an opportunity to do that. And in some ways, they were winning at that. But that's why we have to stand up, take our country back, and motivate people to go back to work.
Now, you touched on something there that's very interesting to me, because I care a lot about national security and about international relations. And you touched on economic competition and warfare here, what I would call economic warfare between the US and China. Now, I believe that conventional warfare between the US and China and the US and Russia is all but unheard of, because we're both nuclear powers. We don't want to get to the point where we're nuking everybody and there's mutually assured destruction. So what do they do to sidestep that? They go to cripple us economically and socially, culturally. So can you both speak to the economic fallout, competition, and if you agree with me, economic warfare that's been happening between the United States and China, how Trump has affected that, and how we might be able to strike back and to rise above the occasion in the future?
Yeah, I think, well, fortunately, Trump had put up the deregulation for businesses. He put up the tariffs to stop the low cost products coming into the United States through slave labor. And he basically gave us a lower tax system that wanted people to be here, big business, small business, right? When you're in business, the government's your partner. And under the Obama administration, that partnership was very costly, 50% and more. Under the new administration, under the new tax plan, you actually can save some, right? With taxes, there's two people. There's people that pay tax and people that don't, right? So when you pay taxes, you're distributing wealth. And I think Trump made that so that we could keep some of that wealth, invest in our companies, invest in our employment, deregulate so it's not so costly to be in business, and then put the tariffs up so that we're not competing against low wages and, the Asian, warfare over there.
Absolutely. And it is warfare. It's economic warfare. It's political warfare. It's definitely warfare. And just like, the way that we're doing business has changed. And, I talked about, businesses needing to evolve and use technology. The way that, other countries are implementing warfare against us has changed. It's not about just coming over with a bunch of muskets and shooting at each other anymore.
Right.
It's now about, how do we take control? This is world domination. And unfortunately, in America right now, we are living in a very divided country. And we have two very polarizing agendas. We have one that is that globalist, one world domination sort of order. And we have another one, which is the foundation of America, patriotism and capitalism. And you have to decide really what you're supporting. And I think a lot of Americans really don't understand the globalist agenda and how that is really what led to World War II in Europe. And that's really what destroyed so many countries. My parents are Austrian immigrants. They came here during World War II. And what drove Austria's economy into the toilet was nationalism and socialism. And that's actually what caused the problem. And that's why they ended up here and why the Nazis were able to take over countries like Austria. So when people get upset with me online and they say, how can you make the comparison? And how can you say Nazi? And how can you throw around these terms? I go back to the fact that I am a first generation American. My parents experienced this firsthand, and it's not so far away from me. And a lot of Americans are 3 generations removed from this, and they really need to brush up on history. And that's why another reason, too, why we need to stop tearing these statues down and trying to erase history, because if you don't embrace history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Amen. And I think a lot of people forget that the Nazi party was a socialist party. Nazis were socialists. These were not radical right wingers. These were radical left wingers. Now, on that topic, can you both, we have a political expert and an economic expert. Can you both give to the good people your definition of socialism versus free market capitalism? Because I think that these are 2 things that need to be defined today. They need to be understood. So tell us the strengths and weaknesses of both, if there are any strengths to socialism. You know what my bias is. But go ahead, tell us about both in your own words as people who have studied politics and the economy.
Yeah, well, certainly I have family that's come from Cuba, so I know what socialism's all about, and that's, all about the government and not about the people, right? And so you have professions all across the board in Cuba, and everyone still makes $1 a week, right? And they're tied strictly to the government. They come over here, and everyone did mass exodus out of Cuba to have what we have here in our country was an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to work and to have your own wages and build your own company and not be dependent and relying on the government and not tied to them, right, Karen?
I can even put it even simpler than that. It's freedom versus slavery. Socialism is slavery. Freedom is what this country was founded on. That is America. That is patriotism. And that's why we have to stand up for America, our Constitution, and stay true to our values. Excellent.
And when we look at the trends of the Democrat Party, which really I think is doing discredit to Democrats of the past, because the Democrats of today are increasingly radical. They're nothing like the Democrats from the 1950s. They're actually more like socialist communists. What do you think a Democratic presidency under Joe Biden and now Kamala Harris, what would that look like with the economy war that we see between the US and China? What do you think we should expect if that were in our future?
Well, he's already said that he would repeal the tax reform. So our tax rates would go up substantially. The regulations would go back, right? And we would remove the tariffs. And so we'd go back to a worse economy because we're coming out of COVID and then going into the Great Depression. I would guess that would be the next thing that would happen.
And I think I'm going to need to use something that only Joe Biden would be able to figure out, or the people that are old enough to figure it out, is I would put the VCR on rewind for that one, because there's no going back. We're now in the digital age. This is a man who's out of touch with reality. He's bringing up record players and hairy legs. I mean, the fact that anybody could vote for him is perplexing to me. I look at this every day, and the only thing that I can come to terms with is that he is truly just a puppet. And then I feel bad. I feel bad because he's an elderly man who obviously has some form of dementia, and he's being strung up as a puppet for this communist agenda. And it's really pretty sick. And Kamala, let's face it, Kamala's a girl who slept her way to the top. She's an opportunist. You can read all the articles, you can do the research. So I don't know how you can take that situation seriously. She would take a nomination from anyone. And she doesn't care that he's an old man with dementia that's being strung up like a puppet. She sees an opportunity to make herself, a little bit better, climb that ladder a little bit harder and get more things. And, I don't think she's above doing anything to get the nomination. And I mean anything.
Wow. Yeah, strong words, but I think exactly correct. Now, I want to remind all the listeners, we are with our economy town hall here. You can go to NRN Plus, that's NRNPLUS.com/live to submit questions as we're talking right now, and I will have them submitted to me here and I can read them off. So on that topic, let's go to Bond W, who asks, I'm hearing screams from the left that the tax reform that Trump signed will take money from Social Security's funds and will be made permanent after the pandemic because he promised to take away Social Security permanently. Is this correct?
Yeah, I mean, how are you going to pay with it unless, we keep the party in house?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, that's just, I have nothing else to say.
I mean, if you become socialist, that's it.
There's nothing. I mean, that's again, now you're a slave to the government. There's no option to go to socialism. This shouldn't even be on the table. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair point. So you're saying, look, the choice we have is to lose everything or to use what we have to survive. Is that correct? Is that a fair?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Michael A asked, our country is one of the few with sustainable, vast natural resources. And we know about that in Western PA. Shout out to my people here. Do you think that this is an advantage for our economy long term?
Well, it depends on who's in the house, right? I mean,
That's
I don't understand how anyone in PA could vote for Biden who would shut those natural resources and those jobs right down.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's so hypocritical in every way, shape, and form that, when it's not convenient for them, like here we have this plethora of natural resources that could help our economy, that could be tapped into, that, could help us thrive. But yet now they're going to pull another card on that and say, oh, the environment and this and that, because it doesn't suit their narrative. It's not about the fact that they care. They don't care. They don't care.
Yeah,
it's not about the environment. It's just convenient for them.
And if you really cared about the environment, and I say this to people like Greta Thunberg and to other activists, you would speak out against our competitors like China, Russia, and India, who damage the environment in a massively, massively more impactful way than the US. Their regulation, their safety measures are nowhere near what ours are, and no one speaks out against them. They only target the West, America, and some sections of Europe.
I don't know about you, but when I hear Greta Thunberg, I say to myself, I know from my standpoint how much I've grown up over my life since the time that I was 17. I'm now a 47-year-old woman. There's a lot of things that you look at her age and her perspective that you see very differently than you see when you become a taxpayer and somebody who's contributing to the world and society as a whole. The fact that she's now a CNN commentator just is a head scratcher.
An expert commentator, not just a commentator. They have her on expert panels now, which is wild.
It's wild. It's wild, and she's a child.
And I think we do see, I guess, on both sides of the extreme of the spectrum, we see the elderly being abused by the left. Joe Biden, a man who's clearly struggling with his mental capacity. And we see minors, literally people who are not even of legal voting age, being used and touted out into the public eye by the left. And then the game that they play is they put her out there. They hang her out to dry. And then when she gets disagreed with by conservatives, they say, well, how dare you attack a child? Well, you're the one who put her on a global stage. That's your problem.
It's political trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like elder trafficking or child trafficking. It's political trafficking. They are using these people. They are literally empty shells that someone else is occupying. It's like a spirit taking over their body. And that's truly what it is. They're not saying things because that's what they feel passionate about. It's what they're being fed and what they're being puppeted.
Now, Julio, I have a question for you. So Joe Biden has said that without exception, if elected, he wants to end shale and fracking, period, end of sentence. He wants to end it. My opponent, a longtime 26-year incumbent, agrees with him. In Western PA, where I think that would absolutely gut our region of our energy production jobs. What can you speak to as an economist about the effects that cutting out our natural resources as Americans would have on our economy and on our future? What would we see if that were ever to materialize?
Well, hyperinflation, we see through the pandemic, right, that when we don't have control over resources and China and Asia has it, we can't even combat the virus, right? We have to rely on them for some of the materials just to deal with our struggling virus. Can you imagine if we get rid of fracking? I mean, you want to, pay 10 times the amount for gas and have no resources and be dependent on other countries? I think that's ridiculous.
I mean, look at what we went through, again, not so long ago. It's history repeating itself. I mean, you talk about, okay, Billy Joel had a great song, Allentown. Remember that song? Closing all the factories down. You talk about the coal mines, what took place then, we're finally getting back to the fact that we can be sustainable as a country, getting back to the fact that we have natural resources that other countries have and that other countries want. I lived through the gas shortages in the 1970s in New Jersey. I remember them. I was a kid. I remember the Jimmy Carter presidency. We really want to go back there?
Yeah, excellent points. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cue my studio. We have a video question that will be queuing up for right after this. But while they're getting that ready, I'm going to ask another text question, which is from Carol D, who asks, what do you think it will ultimately take to get America back to the economically thriving state it was in before the pandemic? What can we as citizens do to help that process along? So this recovery process, how can we as legislators pass policy to encourage that? And what can the citizens do to contribute to bringing their lives back to normal, back to a state of thriving?
Yeah, I think tax policy is the key, right? And we have to have good tax policy that basically, again, rewards companies to get open, rewards people to go to work, and ultimately government in the states that allows people to open up and match those credits, right? It's not just federal credits, but it's state credits as well. And states have to invest in the businesses and the individuals, as does the federal government. I mean, we talk about increasing the debt, but if we don't invest in ourselves, what would we invest in? And I think that's what it's going to take.
And that's exactly when these globalists would step in. If we don't have the resources, we don't have the ability to be self-sustaining, we leave ourselves open to being controlled by other countries, other economies, and other interests. And we cannot allow that to happen. That is anti-American in itself.
Yeah, and that's scary. That is a terrifying reality, but that is the choice that lies before us right now. A choice of giving over our sovereignty and our ability to choose for ourselves how to run our own country, or welcoming in foreign powers to become our new dictators. That's absolutely terrifying. Now, let's see if we have the video question from Rebecca H ready from the NRN studio. Can you guys go ahead and roll that clip from Rebecca H? And we've got the visuals. There we go.
Looks hey, like thanks for taking my question.
Good.
I wanted to ask about the long-term impacts of school closures on the economy. And I know we have a lot of motivations to get our kids back in school, and some of them are economic, but it feels like a lot of the politicians, particularly Democrats, are in favor of keeping them closed longer. So I wanted to ask what kind of impacts that's going to have over the long term.
Well, it's been, devastating for employment, right? When people are having to stay home and take care of their kids and not be able to provide for their kids because the kids are working, basically living at home and not going to school.
It's a lot. I'm a mom. I have a lot of friends that are moms. I have a lot of friends with younger children than my own children. And it's something that really affects the entire family. And again, I feel like there's a more sinister agenda at play as far as the political narrative here and political manipulation. And I hate to make it all about that, but I don't really see another option. That is what it is. And families are being affected really on every level with this. And it's so important for the families and for the children for us to get back to some sense of normality. And there's got to be a way to find a balance. But I think the biggest impact that we're having is, not only the kids and their social skill, but the fact that people can't work. And this is destroying our economy. And it's destroying the ability of families to have a normal life. It's been really difficult for me, and my son's pretty self-sufficient, but this online learning has been a whole new world, and it's overwhelming for a lot of parents, including myself.
How many children have died from COVID?
Yeah, exactly.
How many?
Zero.
Not many. Yeah. Is it zero? I know that everything south, every age south of 65 years old has been showing that the common flu is actually more dangerous than COVID for people younger than 65. So over 65, we see a drastic spike in mortality rates for the elderly, and which we kind of touched on earlier, where we said, sure, have these safety measures, pay attention to the people who need it the most. But when it comes to our children, our schools, our young workers, and by young, I mean middle-aged. I mean, we're talking 35. You're extremely safe in this environment. And we see these long-lasting economic downsides that are going to be hurting us for, I guess here's a question. How long do you think it will take to recover? Years, months, decades? What does the recovery time span look like?
I think personally, it depends on who wins the election.
Yeah.
So if the Republican Party wins the election, Donald Trump wins the election, then I think we have the infrastructure and the tax policy in place to rebound quickly. I'm sure by, sometime shortly we'll have the vaccine, but I think this whole thing will be past November. And with that in place, I think you'll see America come back strong.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, I have a question about incentive, and we spoke a little bit about incentive, but here's something I've seen. I've seen a lot of hardworking people who lost their jobs come to me and say, Luke, I got to be honest with you. I'm making more money with the $600 kicker and the unemployment than I was making when I was working 50-hour weeks, working my tail off. So what incentive is there for me to go back to work? And these aren't people who made a life, but prior to this, out of, leeching off the system. These aren't people who like to abuse others, but they're saying, if I'm at home with my family making more money than I did when I was working 50 hours a week, what incentive is there for me to go back? How can we incentivize that? How can we encourage people not only to feel safe physically, but also then to feel that passion to go back to work? What can we do economically to fix this?
Yeah, I think one, we have to get rid of the $600, stay at home payment, right? Pay to stay, right? And
pay to stay.
Pay to stay. That is it.
Pay to stay. It's terrible. And I think that that's something that really is a big problem right now. It's a big problem. I mean, it's unfortunate that people are doing better with this than they were before. And that, that's enough for them to be able to thrive more than they were thriving before. But, it's not a solution. And I feel, again, like this is a political play here. This is to get people attuned to the fact that they can be lazy and still get paid. That's that's not a good precedence to set here, and it's not something that I would want to teach my children. And I don't know what we do except pull back that payment.
Yeah, and we give them the payroll tax holiday so that they are getting more in their paycheck.
Yeah,
I think that Trump signed that executive order on Saturday so that lessen the money going out for the pay to stay and give them some tax incentives to come back. I think those would be excellent things. Remember, when we pay taxes, when we pay that $600, it comes from the people that paid in the tax.
Right. It feels like free money, but it's not.
There's a limit to how long you can sustain something like that too. There's not, you talk about the national debt, you talk about taxpayer money. This is not something that's not at some point going to be an empty pot if we're not careful.
That's right. I mean, there's only really three sources of revenue that come to the government, or how they get cash, and that's our taxes, right? And then they can print cash, right? And they can put that out into the system, which we ultimately pay
Yeah.
the taxpayers for, or they can issue bonds, right? Which the taxpayers pay for. So it all comes from the taxpayers. And again, it's the redistribution of wealth, right? We're paying our taxes right now to make sure that people stay at home.
Right. I think there's a real lack of understanding for a lot of Americans. And I think it's just purely that they haven't done the research and they don't understand how the economic system works, and they don't
Yeah.
understand the bond system, and they don't understand that when we print money, how exactly the debt works and how that money, where it comes from. And I think we all need an education of that, which is probably why we should get our kids back to school. So maybe we can educate the next generation on how to sustain a decent economy. Maybe they can do a better job than we're doing.
Yeah, I noticed that when the $600 stopped on August 1st, we had 8 million people go back to work that week.
Yeah. Listen,
Amazing.
we
Wow.
gotta get
I
people
didn't
back
see
to
that
work.
stat. Wow. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe printing money, the problem there is simply scarcity, right? So for the listeners, it would be that if you have $10 and then the government prints up a lot more money, all of a sudden your $10 is less valued because the scarcity has gone down. It's not as scarce a resource anymore. Is that correct? And that's how inflation would work. Then they're printing money, and ultimately then we as a taxpayer pay for it. Is that a fair summary?
Right. It devalues the money. It devalues the dollar against other foreign currency, right? So then the money all over the globe goes to where the currency has the most value, right? And so it comes out of the
Yes.
United States. So you would see a mass exodus of investment in the United States, and that money would go elsewhere.
And this is one of the most simple concepts that I sadly see being misrepresented all the time. And it's that the government's money comes from our pockets. It's not, people say things like, well, the government has enough money. Shouldn't they be funding this or that? Shouldn't there be more entitlements? The government's huge. They have money. Their money is taken out of our pockets, out of your pockets. It's not free money. It comes from somewhere. And if it doesn't come out of your pockets, it's going to come out of your children's pockets. It's going to be taken from somewhere, and it's not free. Now, again, to the listeners, I want to remind you, NRN Plus, NRNPLUS.com/live to submit your questions to the economy panel here. We've got about 15 more minutes that we're going to be talking. I have a question for the two of you, and it kind of touches on both of your specialties. So one is, economically speaking, what can you tell the middle class of America, the majority of Americans? What advice would you give them right now? Save, invest somewhere, buy a house. What can they do to bring in a sense of stability? And then politically speaking, what would you advise that Americans do to educate themselves and to look at the future that is being created by the two clashing parties right now in this election year? So economic advice, political advice, action steps for you guys to give
I'll
to
take
the
the
people.
economic one. I think saving is critical. I think that the businesses and the individuals that survived this crisis, had savings, right? The businesses that had, a few months of payroll and in the bank, that's critical, that you always have cash on hand to invest in these cycles that happen in business. And they happen all the time. We have recessions all the time. And this just happens to be a longer form of recession, but it's critical to save. I mean, with cash, you're the king, right? You have the capital, you can survive these periods. And so I think that's ultra critical from the economic side.
And I think on the political and personal side, the first thing you should do is throw your television out your window. That would be the first thing that you should do. 90% of our networks are owned by 6 large corporations. So you have to remember that, their business, it relies on advertising. The media business, I'm a former media executive. I worked for CBS. I worked for many other outlets. I've been in that space for a very, very long time. And the bottom line is, it is an advertising business. It is a business that makes its money from advertisers being on the air. The content that you're consuming, the television show that you're watching, is an advertisement for those advertisers. And, back in the day when, television first came on the scene, it was a lot different. The news was different. Walter Cronkite was different. The day and age of that is over now. And what we're living in now is a world that is consumed with a lot of content. There's a lot to watch. And it's all being driven by advertising dollars by big corporations and a very small monopoly, I'm going to call it, of corporations that call the shots. So we have to really turn off our televisions and start consuming our news from outlets like yourself and other untraditional media that are there. And you need to actually live your life in a way where you're consuming not so much that you become so one-sided that you can't see that developing an opinion on facts is important. So I think that everybody needs to continue to live their lives as normally as possible. Certainly saving's important, but going about your regular day with your family and your children and going to work and consuming media, but in healthy doses and in a way that provides you and arms you with facts. And then you can go ahead and you can disseminate those facts and develop your own opinions. That's the beauty of being a free thinker and the beauty of what America was founded on. It was founded on people that formulated their own opinions and decided that they wanted to do something that was outside of the box. And they did. And that's why we're all here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So educate yourself and look reality in the eyes and realize that these mainstream media shows, they're marketing. They're all about marketing and about selling a story. This is why we see race baiting happening on TV. This is why we see negativity being spread, because those things sell. They get us emotional and they make these people money. It's not about them caring. It's not about their social justice agendas. Those are all just tools that they use to get ahead. Now, I do have a question for both of you about predictions. So I've talked to a lot of people who have said, I suspect that once this government subsidized funding, these bailouts, these stimulus packages, once they stop flowing, once we cut down from 600 to nothing or 600 to 200, as I believe the HEALS Act proposed, once people realize that, oh my goodness, the economy is actually in shambles and I can't just live off of the government because eventually the money will run out. Once we realize that, will we enter something like a depression? Will we enter a series where people are panicking because they realize I've been living off of the government buck for 3 months and now I have nothing? Or do you think people will flood back to work and our economy will be booming? What are the predictions? I guess let's assume a healthy leadership. Let's assume that Trump wins and we're able to continue forward in wanting to reopen. Is the damage going to regardless lead us to a drop? Or will we be able to swing up faster?
I think we'll swing back pretty quick. I think that, once things get opened up, I think people want to be getting back to business. And I think we'll thrive. I think we'll find new highs. I think we'll understand that we're now more reliable on each other and America. And I think that faith and investment in the United States will be a grand one that actually I think we'll get back real quick.
Yeah, I think we're in the drop now. Welcome to the drop. We're in the drop. This is the drop. And when Donald Trump is elected in 2020, I do believe that, things are going to change pretty dramatically day one, that a lot of this noise is going to go away. And that I think when things really start to really open up back up, and I mean, we're open right now, but we're not open in the way that we should be. I think our economy will thrive because I think people will be excited to be back to work, to be out there and to be living a more normal existence here in our beautiful free country.
Yes, excellent. And I'm going to ask one more question here, and then I'll give you guys each a closing statement, some messages, some encouragement, some warnings, whatever it may be, to share with the viewers and listeners, and also some contact for both of you to share so that people can get in touch with you. So the last question here is both of your thoughts from a political and economic standpoint on the Green New Deal. This is something that I thought we were done with, a year ago. And then it has resurfaced. My opponent supports it. Joe Biden supports it. Of course, AOC, who introduced it, she supports it. I think this is extremely dangerous politically and economically. What are your thoughts on it? And what might we expect if we actually saw someone trying to push this down the throats of American business?
It's recycling garbage. That's what it is. It's recycling garbage. And, I say that, and just to insert a little humor in it, but it really is something that wasn't going to work back then. It's not going to work now. It holds no weight. But again, you want to talk about marketing. It's a catchy phrase. It's a brand. Everybody knows it. Everybody knew what it was. And because it's catchy and it has that brand recognition, they've now latched onto it again. That's simply what this is. It's not about the cause itself. It's not about the Green New Deal. It's about the fact that that's a catchphrase that the American public knows and associates with this social justice, global, thing, cleaning up the environment. I mean, it's just, it comes down to it being catchy more than anything else.
Julio, anything to add on to that?
Well, I think, you just see the big corporations just move away again and not deal with it. I mean, I think it would be devastating to our country.
I can't imagine that it's ever going to work. I actually think it'll never work. I can't imagine that they could even put that deal together. At least maybe I'm being too optimistic.
Yeah. And let's talk briefly. I promised last question, but we've got a little bit of time left here. Let's go to taxation. Can you speak about tax policies? Speak about the weaknesses you see today, specifically, I guess, for Julio, since this is in your wheelhouse, the weaknesses you see in current existing established American tax policy, and what might we restructure it for a better future for all Americans?
Yeah, I think, one of the most important tax policies we have is the research and development tax credit. And that's a reward to reward U.S. companies that hire U.S. employees to create innovation here in the country. And we're not very competitive globally. That's why we see a lot of U.S. companies put offices in the UK and Australia and Canada, where a lot of those credits are much higher. So, we've been advocating in DC and lobbying with the Senate and the House to increase those R&D tax credits so that we keep those jobs that are going offshore. And I think it's the weakest link we have currently in the system. And I know that the president's talked about increasing that, and so has the Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee. But we got to get it done quickly. Otherwise, we'll continue to lose very valuable jobs here in the country.
Yeah, I love that. So the idea is basically just to keep American business here, to incentivize them to stay here, to build here, and to employ individuals here through tax credits that will ultimately feed back and benefit all of us. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what we need to do. And we need to do a much better job of it.
Yeah, excellent. Hopefully, with 4 more years of Republican leadership and of true, not only Republican, but true conservative leadership in the House, in the Senate, in the presidency, and then also conservative judges being appointed, I think we might be able to push for that increasingly so. So how can people contact each of you, and where are you most active, and give your final thoughts to the listeners?
Sure, Karen.
Well, I actually have a new show on YouTube called Behind the Headlines, where I delve deep behind the headlines, behind the stories you see in the mainstream media. We pull it apart. We give you real facts and real information. So I would encourage everybody to go to my YouTube channel. It's Behind the Headlines TV. Please subscribe. I'm putting a lot of new episodes and segments out there, and I would love if you would watch me there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Karen Turk, KARYNTURK. And everywhere else that you do social media.
Excellent.
And what's your advice, Karen? What's your final?
My final advice is really to stop consuming the mainstream media and reach out to outlets like you. Watch things like the videos I put out and consume information that's going to be good for you, good for your family, and is going to help you pursue the American dream and American freedom, which is really what we're all about.
Excellent.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that, Karen, as my final thought is that we've been through pandemics. We've had many different viruses that have been just as bad. We had smallpox, polio, and more recently, some of the other viruses that were just as devastating as COVID. The only thing that was different back then was that we didn't have the media.
And it wasn't an election year.
And it wasn't an election year. So, we all didn't shut down for those viruses. Our economies grew back then. We were out there. We just worked, right? We didn't know anything different.
You got sick, you went to the doctor. Unfortunately, you got more sick, you went to the hospital.
And these were just as deadly. I mean, and we'll
Yeah.
always go through those, right? We'll always have every decade some
And if
new
we
virus.
don't, then we are going to end up under socialism because we're going to become a weak country and people are going to take advantage of that weakness. And I don't want to see that happen, not for me and not for my children.
Yeah, it's so funny when the children were staying at home during smallpox, they're the ones that ended up dying quicker because they weren't building up their immune
Immunity.
systems, right? And
Yeah.
so that was difficult. So listen, you can get a hold of me at the Tax Reform Expert on Twitter, and our website is engineeredtaxservices.com. So please reach out there. There's a lot of great information on tax credits, tax incentives for all small businesses to take advantage of. And I think really, you know, for small business, you know, invest in tax, because I think most of you see it as an expense. You see it as something that just needs to get done. But if you actually get a good tax consultant and you invest in that person, you'll get a 10 times return, because you'll get the PPP loans, you'll get the tax credits associated, you get the tax write-offs. You'll take advantage of all these tax credits that you wouldn't normally take advantage of because you don't have that expert that you're investing in. So again, it's not an expense, it's an investment if you do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I echo that encouragement. It is totally worth you knowing what you are doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, pay someone else, hire someone else who does, because they can help you. They can save you a lot of headache and a lot of money. So, I mean, that makes total sense. And look, that's the reality that we live in. Part of our social contract is paying taxes. I've had friends more on the libertarian side of the aisle who say taxation is theft. No, actually, taxation without representation is theft. Taxation is part of the social contract that we live under, and we have the right to elect officials who decide how we spend those tax dollars. Excuse me there. Sorry, I think it cut out for a moment. We have the right to elect officials who decide how we spend tax dollars, which is a beautiful right as Americans that we enjoy. Enjoy that on November 3rd when you vote. Negron2020.com is where you can reach me. Thank you both so much for being here, for sharing your thoughts and advice. And I hope to hear back from both of you. We'll have to network together. Thanks a lot.
We'll be
Thank
at
you.
We'll be at your victory party.
Absolutely.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Everybody stay safe. Get in touch with these two individuals. And thanks for joining NRN Plus today. We will see you next time. Take it easy.